Welcome everyone to Solar for Apartment Buildings, sponsored by Ryde City Council. On the call as co-host tonight, we have Liz Pearce from the sustainability team at Council, and Jackie Zong has been letting people in to this webinar. We're going to talk for the next 30 minutes about solar for apartment buildings. And on the front page, you can see 13 to 19 Warren Street in Ryde. And this is a very special multi-tenant apartment building. It's one of the first two apartment buildings in Sydney to do a very special type of solar arrangement. So we'll come back and we'll chat a little bit more about this as we move into the webinar. There's a chat box which you can open for putting any questions into. And we would just ask that you put the questions into the chat box, and then at the end of the presentation, Liz will read out the questions and we'll try and address them for you. And in terms of the presentation, we'll probably spend about 30 minutes going through a slide pack, and hopefully we'll cover an apartment building that's just like the apartment building that you may live in. So we're probably joined by a lot of people living in different style apartment buildings tonight, from townhouses up to maybe a high rise. So with that, we'll jump into the presentation. So we're going to be looking at, first of all, sustainability in apartment buildings, why you might put solar on an apartment complex. What's the opportunity? What are the 4 different models for doing solar on apartment buildings? How can an owner's corporation or a body corporate pay for a solar system? What are some federal rebates? And what are the other considerations? We'll also have a couple of case studies on the way through, and time for questions at the end. So first of all, sustainability in apartment buildings refers to a wide range of energy, water, and waste measures. It can also include new technologies like solar, batteries, and electric vehicle charging. According to the recent National Strata Insights report, there are 340,000 apartment buildings across Australia, housing 15% of total households. And the insured value of these apartment buildings is now $1.1 trillion. So over time, we're hoping that the 340,000 apartment buildings in Australia start to resemble the sustainable picture of an apartment building that we see on the screen. So why put solar on apartment buildings? Well, a great fact just in the last couple of weeks is there are 2.5 million rooftop solar installations in Australia, and 22% of houses across the nation now have solar panels. However, when we move to the apartment sector, there's been very limited uptake in some local government areas. Maybe 0.5 or 0.6% of apartment buildings have solar photovoltaic systems. Now, solar is a great source of clean electricity. It can lower the bills, potentially for the common areas or the common areas and individual apartments. When it's combined with future technologies like batteries, it can increase energy security, allowing apartment buildings to perhaps operate common services when there's a power outage. And the location of generating the solar on the roof is very close to where it's consumed, which means you don't have the distribution losses which are involved when electricity comes from a power plant in the Hunter Valley all the way down to Sydney. So solar is a great way of reducing our fossil fuel reliance, reducing our carbon emissions, and from a more practical perspective, during the summer periods in Sydney where air conditioning is running on the hottest days, it's useful in reducing network demand, which can reduce the possibility of power outages or brownouts or blackouts. But what have been some of the barriers to solar uptake on apartment buildings? Well, first of all, we have to talk about split incentives. So according to the National Strata Insights report, 48% of the apartments in the apartment buildings in Australia are rented out by landlords or tenanted. So this creates a split incentive between owner-occupiers who live in the building and owner-investors who are renting out their apartments, and often buildings which don't have a proportion of people in either of those camps to gain a majority can't get the numbers to do a solar project. However, there are some new innovations which are going to make it easier for this to occur in the future. Now, in our strata buildings, communication has been an issue and continues to be an issue. Communication between strata managers and strata committees, between strata committees and residents in the buildings. And we have to say there's a challenge with apathy in our apartment buildings. Most apartment buildings are not professionally managed with a building manager or facilities manager, so it's reliant on volunteers to pitch in and try and get projects moving outside work time. Now, there's been a lack of information around solar in apartment buildings, and that's what Ryde City Council is trying to address with this webinar tonight. I should mention this is one of 4 webinars. Last week we talked about lighting, and coming up we've got ventilation and hot water for apartment buildings on the next 2 Tuesday nights. So you may want to join us for those as well. These are being recorded, and we'll put them up on the web for people to be able to view them later. Now, when it comes to access to finance as a barrier to getting solar onto a strata building, sometimes this is an issue, but sometimes we have capital works funds which are quite healthy in our apartment buildings. And one of the ways that people could consider solar is to imagine, instead of getting 1 or 1.5% interest rate on a capital works fund balance, if you were to install solar on the building and then convert that back to an interest rate, would that look like 5, 6 or 7% return per annum? Would this sort of thinking stimulate more apartment buildings to move down the path of installing solar? And one last item we'll cover today probably only affects a few apartment buildings in the right area is embedded networks, but these are sometimes smart meter networks set up in new large developments that are being built. So what's the opportunity? 62% of Australian apartments are in buildings under 4 stories high. And in fact, if we took that a little bit further, 70% of the apartment blocks are under 5 stories high. So an apartment block that's under 5 stories high is a good contender for having a solar system installed. It does get more difficult as you go into high rise. And while the towers at Barangaroo have solar panels on the top of them, it's not an easy project due to wind speed sign-offs and structural engineering requirements at great heights. But a third of new dwellings that are being built are apartment buildings, and apartment buildings are growing faster than townhouses. They are the fastest growing section of the built environment in Australia. So you can see the commitment to solar with City of Ryde Mayor, Councillor Jerome Laxale and Councillor Edwin Clifton at one of the solar systems installed on a council building here in the Ryde area. Now, a question we often get asked is, how can solar work in a multi-tenant apartment building? And here is a diagram that shows how a single solar system on the roof can share solar into a common area meter and also into the individual apartment meters. And this is due to an innovative technology developed by a Melbourne company called Illume Energy. And we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more about this model later on. But until 2020, in Sydney, in the Ausgrid network area, it wasn't possible to do one of these setups where you've got a single solar system sharing solar power into each of the individual apartments in the apartment block. But before we go there, we'll just look at a couple of units of measurement. So first of all, what is a kilowatt? A kilowatt is a measure of instantaneous power. Now, the size of a solar system is measured in kilowatts. For example, a 25 kilowatt solar system. Solar systems make direct current electricity, which needs to be transformed into alternating current or AC, which means there is some loss of power in conversion. Now, the other unit of measurement is the kilowatt hour. This is a measure of energy. So this is what you get billed on your electricity bill. Your retailer bills you for kilowatt hours. And if we're talking about batteries, this is the measure of the energy stored in a battery. For example, a 14 kilowatt hour Tesla Powerwall. So a couple of rules of thumb. What's the relationship between solar system size in kilowatts and the energy produced in kilowatt hours? Well, this differs depending on where you are on the planet and the amount of solar or sunlight that you get each day. But here in Australia, one of the best countries for solar generation on the planet, a 25 kilowatt solar system might produce 100 kilowatt hours of total energy over the course of the sunny part of the day. So a rule of thumb is 4 times the energy in kilowatt hours per day is created as the size of the system in kilowatts. Then the next thing we often get asked is, what's the relationship between the size of the solar system in kilowatts and the number of solar panels? So first of all, each solar panel is roughly 2 meters by 1 meter. However, panels of similar size may have different performance characteristics. They may create more or less power. So a 250 watt panel won't generate as much as a 330 watt panel. So when we're going back to what's the size of the solar system, a 1 kilowatt solar system could be made up of 3 330 watt panels or 4 250 watt panels. Obviously, the lower the performance of the panels, the more space it takes on the roof. And the same as computer processors, as you buy faster processors, you start to pay a performance premium, and the same with solar panels. So a company called Trina has just announced 500 watt panels and even a 600 watt panel coming down the line. But most of the installations will be in the 300 to 400 watt panel area at present. So just to recap, AC-DC is a band. DC-AC is the process that happens in a solar system. On this slide, we've got a picture of a large-scale solar system that's been installed on the Ryde Aquatic Centre. But in this next section, we're going to look at 4 different solar models that can be installed on an apartment building. First, we look at the most common type of solar setup, which is a solar system which only connects to the common area load. That is the house lights or common area meter. Now, when you have a solar system connected to a meter, if there's not enough demand on that meter at a particular time of day where more solar is generated than can be consumed inside the building, then the extra solar will feed into the grid. So that is actually a bidirectional smart meter that allows electricity to flow in from the grid when there's not enough sunlight or at nighttime, and when there's too much generation, it allows electricity to flow back into the grid, for which the energy retailer will pay some compensation back to the owner's corporation or body corporate, typically 10 cents per kilowatt hour, maybe as high as 19 or 20 cents per kilowatt hour. The second type of solar setup for an apartment building is individual solar systems for each individual unit in the building. Now, this setup is typically best for a townhouse complex that might have a sprawling estate of townhouses with ample roof space. It could also be done on a low-rise building, maybe a 2 or 3 level apartment block. The challenge with this model is that you need a separate inverter for each solar system, and an inverter that converts the DC to AC is an expensive piece of equipment. So you're not really getting economies of scale when you are replicating this technology for each individual apartment in the complex. However, this model, you can pass a special use bylaw just in favour of the owners that do want to put a solar system in at their own cost. And you can download these special use bylaws relatively cheaply off the internet, maybe for $299. And that individual can then go about putting their own solar system in. Keep in mind, in a strata complex, all the roof space is common property. So the first person in might actually choose the best solar access part of the roof, which is not shaded by any other buildings or trees, which might not be directly above where their apartment or townhouse is. So keep in mind, the roof space in the strata is all common property, and first in best dressed under this model in terms of the location for solar access of the first systems in. The other thing to keep in mind, the special use bylaws for individual apartment solar systems have to cater for the scenario where the building might have to do roofing repairs, and then it's the individual apartment owner's responsibility to pay for removal of their solar system while the roofing repair can be done, and then reinstallation of their solar system after the roofing repair is done. We'll move on to solar sharing gateway, or another name for this is a power division management system. This is a system which is developed by the company in Melbourne called Illume Energy, which I referred to earlier. So if we look at this picture, we can see a single solar system on the roof of the apartment building. That's connecting through to a solar sharing gateway. But before the power goes into the solar sharing gateway, it goes through an inverter, gets converted to AC, and then the solar sharing gateway is actually measuring the demand in real time of each of the units that it's connected to. And what it's doing is during the solar generation period, it's actually squirting the solar that's generated to the units that need it the most. And it's got an accounting system that's operating in the cloud that's measuring how much solar from the shared solar system in the roof is going into each of the individual apartments over the course of a month. If, for example, one of the unit dwellers goes on a road trip into New South Wales for 2 weeks, then the demand from their unit will go down in that period, and the solar sharing gateway will be intelligently allocating solar that's generated to the other units during that 2-week period. When that resident comes back from their New South Wales road trip, then the solar sharing gateway will detect that they're back in their apartment and will actually be sending more solar to them in the last 2 weeks of the month, such that by the end of the month, all the units that are connected to the solar sharing gateway get the equivalent amount of solar power fed to them. And the important thing about this is that it takes away the effort of having a separate billing system, a user pays billing system that measures people on the solar that they consume in their apartment. And it takes away the need to have 2 bills, an energy retailer bill for your electricity that comes from the grid, and a separate solar bill that you have to pay each month or each quarter. So by intelligently allocating exactly the same amount of solar to each unit that's connected to the system, the entire system can be fair and equitable. Now, the other benefit of the solar sharing gateway is that not every apartment in the building has to participate. So if you've got an apartment complex with 10 units, 5 are owned by owner investors and 5 are owned by owner occupiers, perhaps only the 5 owner occupiers and maybe one of the owner investors want to join together, pitch in their share of a shared solar system, and those people will get the benefit. The people that didn't want to participate in this model don't have to pay $2,000 to $3,000 for their share of the joint solar system, and can just let the other people that are interested in solar go about their business. So this has been a great innovation that's been brought into the market in Sydney, approved in the Ausgrid area in 2020, and we're going to jump back to 13 to 19 Warren Street in Ryde. And on the right, you can see the solar system on the roof of this multi-tenant apartment complex. And on the left, you can see 2 Fronius inverters and 2 solar sharing gateways. So just to give you an idea, each solar sharing gateway can connect up to a maximum of 15 individual apartments. At 13 to 19 Warren Street, there are 17 apartments, and all apartments are connected to the solar sharing system, so they needed a second solar sharing gateway. But obviously, if you've got an apartment building where the number of people interested in solar sharing is a multiple of 15, you're going to get the best economics in terms of the cheapest price for each individual apartment owner to pay for their share of the solar sharing system. So if you've got 15, 30, 45 or 60 apartments that are interested, you'll get the lowest per unit cost per apartment for joining in a solar sharing gateway arrangement. And this is, here in Ryde, is only the second of this type of system to be installed in the Greater Sydney area. It was installed in the last couple of years in a number of locations in Melbourne, but is now approved for installation in Ausgrid network, which is the key network, or the grid network under all of the Ryde City Council area. And then finally, we'll look at one other type of solar arrangement on an apartment building. And this is where you have an embedded electrical network or smart meter network. This is a network where you have a gate meter or parent meter sitting in front of the common area meter and all the unit meters. enabling bulk buying of electricity from the electricity grid or the national electricity market. And if you have a solar system on a building that has an embedded electrical network, you can connect that solar system through an inverter to the gate meter. And then from the gate meter, the solar power will flow through common areas and each of the individual units. So the benefit is if you've got a fridge running in your apartment, it can be benefiting from solar power. And this is measured on a user pays basis on how much solar you actually consume, but it's integrated into the billing that you get from that third-party embedded electrical network operator that's managing the embedded electrical network for your apartment building. So if we jump over here to the Genesis building at 133 Bowden Street in Meadowbank, here we have an example of a 30 kilowatt solar system connected to an embedded electrical network. And this system is sharing the solar into the individual apartments as well as the common areas of this building, 58 apartments. We'll come back and we'll have another look at the Genesis towards the end in a case study. There's something else special that's going on in terms of the use of solar power in this building. Now, there are two different ways that an owner's corporation or body corporate can pay for a solar system. Two main models. First of all is an upfront capital expenditure model or CapEx model. Typically, this model gives the maximum amount of control to the owner's corporation or the body corporate. By paying for the solar system upfront, the strata will receive the benefit of the power from the solar system and be able to determine where that solar power is used and the operating model. You will still have an energy retailer, a normal brand name, maybe an Origin, AGL, Energy Australia, but you'll negotiate a new common area electricity contract with that energy retailer that has a feed-in tariff that'll be paid in kilowatt hours to the strata for any excess solar which is paid into the grid. And the owner's corporation will directly pay a solar installer to design and install the system, process government rebates, and they're usually quoted net of the system price at the time of purchase. And that solar installer will also provide warranty repairs and potentially a monitoring system that allows the owner's corporation to check the performance of their solar system using a website or a smartphone app. The other model that people have sometimes heard of is called a power purchase agreement. This is a form of solar finance or leasing, and this is a model where the strata doesn't initially own the solar system. So typically, for maybe the first 10 years of the life of the solar system sitting on the roof of the apartment block is owned by a third party. It could be an energy retailer or a solar financier. Under this model, typically the owner's corporation agrees to pay a price for electricity that's coming off the panels on the roof of the building per kilowatt hour, but that price is cheaper than the price they get from their energy retailer for buying electricity from the grid. However, one of the things an owner's corporation or body corporate would have to check is that the price that they pay for electricity coming off the panels on their roof is actually cheaper than the price of their grid energy that they're getting under their energy retailer contract. These are usually, they can be the same entity, but it can also be two different parties that you're dealing with. So in this model, for the first 10 years, the solar installer financier is responsible for making any repairs to the solar system if it breaks a faulty panel or a failed inverter. The inverter is an expensive piece of equipment that sometimes lasts between 6 to 12 years. So obviously, the solar installer financier is hoping that the inverter will last over the 10 years in this model. After 10 years, the ownership of the solar system will go to the owner's corporation or the body corporate. And for the next 15 years of the life of that solar system, up to 25 years, the owner's corporation or body corporate will be responsible for making any repairs, maintaining the solar system. But from years 11 through to 25, the owner's corporation will get the full benefit of the solar generated off the system and won't have to pay per kilowatt hour price to the solar financier. So what are the government rebates that are involved? Small Technology Certificates, or STCs, is the federal government rebate that applies to solar systems which are under 100 kilowatts in size. And that will be pretty much all the residential apartment blocks in the RIDE LGA. In New South Wales, there is one new development that's going in at Edmondson Park called ED, which will have a 2.5 megawatt solar system installed at the time of construction. But very few apartment blocks will ever have a solar system that's over 100 kilowatts in size. The small technology certificates, the rebate is paid up front, the full value of it, and it's usually deducted from the price from your solar installer. Make sure that you go with a Clean Energy Council certified solar installer and check the price that on the internet versus the price that they're giving you for the small technology certificates. If you are one of the rare apartment complexes that can take a solar system greater than 100 kilowatts in size, then you would be eligible for large-scale generation certificates. These rebates from the federal government are not paid fully out upfront in the first year. They're paid on an ongoing basis throughout the life of the solar system for the first 10 years. This model is typically not attractive unless you can get a solar system that's bigger than 200 kilowatts. So there's a bit of a dead zone in people not installing many solar systems that are between 100 and 200 because of the federal government rebate system. What are some other considerations? Well, we know that the solar panel lifespan is 25 years, which is longer than the lifespan of typical roof waterproofing. So if you're a strata that needs to do roof repairs or a waterproofing, it's best to do this before the solar system goes down. Here we have an example of a $100,000 waterproofing job, triple layer, on an apartment complex. To give you an idea, the solar system that will one day go on this apartment rooftop will only cost around $30,000 to $40,000. So the waterproofing job is actually typically a more expensive job than the solar system itself. So a question we get asked is it possible to not penetrate an existing waterproof membrane if it's just recently been replaced on the apartment building? And it is possible to install a solar system with ballast. So here we can see concrete blocks weighting down the racking system without any penetration through the waterproofing or the slab on this apartment building. However, you have to keep in mind that the cost of a ballast weighted solar system is typically about a third more than the equivalent solar system that's anchored into the roof. So an alternative is to ask the solar installer about the waterproofer that they work with, and will a waterproofer come back and give a 5 or 10 year warranty on the re-waterproofing around the penetrations that are made with anchor points through an existing proofing solution on the roof. But this is possible, and that's an example from the ARIA building in Waterloo. Another barrier to installing solar in our apartment buildings is the state of the switchboard and the meter board. So here we have an example of an apartment building meter board which is not compliant to AS3000 standard. You can see a wooden backboard there. It's possible for a child to electrocute themselves, and there are ceramic fuses, and this could also be considered a fire risk. I know this myself because my brother's apartment building had a fire in the switch room last year, and my brother, his wife, and my nephew turned up at my apartment and lived with me for 4 days when all 60 apartments were evacuated because of the fire. So this is something that is real, and it's a good hygiene project for apartment buildings to start upgrading the switchboards and the meter boards to get them compliant to AS3000. Another challenge for apartment buildings is, do you have stairway access to the roof level? Some of the older apartment blocks actually just have a fire escape that opens with a door out onto the roof, which makes it easy for solar panels to go up a lift, be carried 1 floor up the fire escape and installed on the roof, and also makes it easy to maintain if there's a faulty panel down the line. Otherwise, you may need to contact your local council, get approval to crane the solar panels up to the roof for installation. And then this increases the cost of the project and reduces the payback. Another consideration is, do you have any shading on your rooftop from trees or other apartment buildings? So a string inverter is a cheaper form of inverter, and this is fine if there's no shading on your building. However, if there is shading for part of the day, then you might want to consider more expensive microinverters or DC optimizers. This technology means that a whole string of panels don't stop operating when shade goes onto one particular panel. Each panel down the line that's not shaded can continue to operate at full power. So here we are, we're back at the Genesis building that we visited earlier, 58 units at 133 Bowden Street in Meadowbank. So here's an upfront close picture from a drone of the solar system on the roof. This is feeding into an embedded electrical network or a smart meter network. The building also has an embedded hot water network using a warm water hot water system with ultraviolet to get rid of Legionnaire's disease, energy efficient motion censored LED lighting everywhere, and on the bottom right hand corner of the screen you can see an electric vehicle charging station which the Strata Committee voted to install in the basement car park. Now the beauty of this EV charging station is that it connects to the common area meter. The common area meter connects to the gate meter, which is connected to the solar system on the roof. So if an electric vehicle were to charge up during the sunny part of the day in this building, that electric vehicle can actually be receiving solar powered energy, which is a renewable form of efficient transport. So this is an example of a green building, and something here in the Ryde municipality. If you look down the rest of the street, none of those apartment buildings have solar panels on them. So it'd be great if the solar panels started multiplying and replicating through the apartment complexes in the Ryde City Council area. So we're just wrapping up the formal part of the presentation, and we're now happy to take any questions that you may have. I'd also point you to, if you're interested in more detailed information, you can Google Solar on Strata white paper and see our white paper that we've written covering the issues that we presented tonight and a number of other issues in more detail. So I'll just throw over to Liz, and she might give a little bit of an update before we take any questions.
Okay, thanks very much, Brent, for sharing your very comprehensive knowledge and expertise on this exciting subject tonight. Thank you all for joining us tonight in this second webinar of a series of 4 on apartment energy efficiency. Look, I work for City of Ryde, and we're very excited to be working with apartments. You may not be aware, but 51% of all households in City of Ryde are apartment households. So there's enormous potential to save energy, not only in individual apartments, but also in the common areas of those apartments. And this is one of those great ways you can do this. Look, aside from this series of webinars for apartments, we also have a couple of other programs you may be interested in. Opportunities for residents to build sustainable communities and reduce their environmental footprint in apartments. We're shortly going to launch our Common Ground program for 2020. It's for apartment residents in City of Ryde, and eligible applicants up to 5 successful apartment blocks will receive a food garden bed for their common area. It's been a very popular program in the last year, and we invite you all to apply. You'll receive, in addition to the garden bed, expert horticulturalist training, workshops and support to set up your garden bed. I will be providing details on that program after this webinar series. In addition, through that program, you also have the opportunity to have a common area energy and water assessment. So that might be an exciting opportunity to access more information for your apartments around these sort of topics for common areas. We also have a program called the Home Waste and Sustainability Advisory Service, and that's open to all apartment residents, both tenants and owners. Through that program, you can receive a free home waste, energy and water assessment, and you'll also receive a tailored report for your individual apartment with strategies for reducing energy, waste and water. So I invite you to participate in both those programs. Certainly in the last year, participants of the Home Waste and Sustainability Advisory Service reported saving on average $500 a year on their electricity bills and over $35 a year on their water bills. So if nothing else, there's some great cost savings for you as apartment residents. Warmly invite you to participate in those programs. As I said, I'll send you out the details after this webinar. In addition, I'll send you my contact details. So I'm more than happy for anyone to contact me further about those programs and any other questions you might have about apartment living in Ryde. I encourage you to join us for the next 2 webinars in the series, which are on over the next 2 Tuesday nights, and you can book in for those on the council website. So I think we'll move now to some questions. Brent, we have a few, so to get started, I'll put a few of these to you.
Yep.
All right. Giselle asks, for a solar sharing gateway, do you need smart meters? Also, for Warren Street, what is payback time for their solar sharing gateway?
Okay, so you do need to make that move to smart meters first, which is a separate project before you do a solar sharing gateway. So if you've got one of those older meter board, switchboard arrangements that we showed a picture of, that's not compliant to AS 3000, we'd recommend that you try and get that on your capital works plan as the preliminary project. it's got multiple benefits doing that project first before you do your solar sharing gateway. It also sets your building up for electric vehicles, induction cooktops, more split air conditioning systems, you know, off-peak hot water in some buildings where you don't have common hot water systems, and also getting access to smartphone apps, bill smoothing, new payment models for electricity. So that project has multiple uses, but it's a precursor project to the solar sharing gateway. For Warren Street, it's not, as we mentioned, they had 17 units. The better payback is when you've got multiples of 15 units. So that building would be looking at like about 9 years plus for payback on the system, which has a 25-year life. Some other apartment buildings, you know, it can be a faster payback. You might be getting, you know, 7 or 8 years. Keep in mind that it's more expensive to do on apartment buildings than on residential houses, where you're getting 3 to 4 year payback. But hopefully that gives an idea as to, you know, relative payback times.
Okay, Brett, we have a question from Paul. Actually, it's a threefold question. What maintenance do solar systems need? Can you install solar on a colour bond roof? And how does this work?
Sure. So maintenance depends on the tilt angle of the roof. If you've got a tiled roof that's tilted, sometimes the solar systems are self-cleaning. The rain's cleaning the dirt and the bird poo off them. Where you've got a flat solar installation, you'll need to have a regular maintenance, maybe you know, once a year, or if you've got a monitoring app, you can actually do maintenance on demand. You can see when the production drops, and that's your cue to get someone up to clean the panels. Other items, you might get the inverter being replaced, as I said, maybe somewhere between the 6 and the 12-year mark. So sometimes it's good to invest in a higher quality inverter so that you get that longer lifespan out of it. Panels can fail, so you may have to replace a panel here and there. But we strongly recommend getting the monitoring apps. The monitoring apps, such as those from Solar Analytics, tell you if something's going wrong with the system and help you diagnose, and just not. One of the challenges with the solar systems out there that aren't monitored is people don't know when they're not working at their peak efficiency. Yes, you can install on a colour bond roof. In fact, buildings that have colour bond roof, we actually recommend those buildings go with a clip lock racking system that can clip around the ridges in the colour bond, and that's actually sometimes cheaper and easier to install than even on a flat concrete roof. Also, you don't have the same challenge with waterproofing that you need to do on flat concrete roofs if you've got colour bond. Yep.
Okay. Erica's just asked if we could send this information out. Yes, Eric will be providing follow-up to both these webinars, including the recording. Would that be correct, Brent?
Yes. Yeah. We're recording it tonight, so we'll provide access to that later. Yep.
Okay. Paul asks, with solar sharing gateway, does each owner tenant still get to choose their grid supplier?
Yes, well, they still get to choose their energy retailer. So there's no impact on who it is. You can still choose to go with whoever you want and pick the energy retailer that gives you the best feed-in tariff.
Okay. A question from Vitali. Can a solar panel be installed close to the garden on the roof? Is it fireproof? And what is the range of costs of a 300-watt panel?
Okay, so close to the garden or on the roof? Well, we haven't seen any. I know people see the solar farms and they see the solar panels like on, metal posts. We haven't seen any strata buildings do that in a garden area. So at the moment, we would kind of recommend just going with a roof area, but it could also be on carports. If you have good sunny access on a carport, you could put a solar panel system there. To give you an idea, the cost of solar panels, typically it's around about $1,000 per kilowatt. So if you divide that by 3 for a 300 watt panel, I want to move on to.
Okay. Next question. Chalice asks, has there been any studies done on the relationship of the amount of sun that is being taken out, used up by the solar system, and reduction in global warming?
I don't know the answer to this one, but what I will say is the amount of solar irradiation that hits the planet, we are not capturing that at any scale that is would even register. Like, it's like point whatever of 1% of solar is captured today, and it's an infinite resource. And if you can imagine, when Elon Musk came to Australia, he drew a pinpoint on the Australian map and said, this is all it would take to power all of Sydney with solar panels. And so really, we also look at Mike Cannon-Brookes' Sun Cable project to try and power Singapore from a large solar battery farm in the Northern Territory. The possibilities are endless in what we can do. And in Australia, we're blessed with one of the best solar irradiation of any country on the planet. And so we should be taking advantage of that.
Okay, Brent Vitali asks, as the efficiency decreases when a solar panel gets hot, is there a system that can cool it down, such as a water spray?
I'm not aware of this, but just on this point of solar panel efficiency, solar panels now come with a performance guarantee that after 25 years, the solar panel will still be producing 80% of the production of electricity that it produced on day one. And the other thing just related to this, there's another innovation called bifacial solar that's coming, where you can actually generate solar power on either side of the panel if the panel's tilted up. And we're going to see more white roofs reflecting sunlight onto the back of bifacial panels. Obviously, like any electrical system, there's increase in impedance when you've got more heat there. But the other benefit to think of from a strata perspective is you're actually taking heat out of the building infrastructure with a solar panel. So, for example, the people in the top floor apartments will have lower air conditioning costs in their individual apartments after there's a solar panel system put on the roof. So they're just a couple of things to think about.
Okay. And finally, Brent, Paul asks, what are the tax implications?
So it's an interesting question, and it has been dealt with. So just really quickly, the tax implication for an individual owner, if, for example, there's a solar system, a common area solar system on the roof that is feeding into the grid and creating revenue for the owners corporation, the question is, that's revenue to the owners corporation. Does that have to be declared on the individual personal tax returns on a per unit entitlement basis based upon the feed-in revenue that's generated by the common area solar system and declared on your personal tax return? Private tax ruling has been done. on this, and it is not needed to declare feed-in revenue on your personal tax return. One other change to legislation I should just mention. This month, we're expecting the passage of the Sustainability Infrastructure Amendments to the New South Wales Strata Schemes Management Act. And what that will do is lower the bar for installing any type of solar system or any environmental system into an apartment building from a special resolution, which is a 75% threshold, down to 50%, which is an ordinary resolution, which should make it easier for apartment buildings just to get, over 50% threshold of owners that are present at a strata meeting and entitled to vote, voting yes to these systems, and that should increase the uptake of solar on our apartment buildings. Okay, so we might leave it there, and thanks to everyone for joining us today for Solar for Apartment Buildings, sponsored by Ryde City Council. We hope you have a great evening. Thank you.